I commend to you going to see the movie 42, Jackie Robinson, if nothing else, to show Hollywood that quality movies that address the real situation are worth producing and that people pay for them. You all know that money speaks, right? If you want to do a little act of justice this week, go see the movie. Has anybody seen it yet? My husband does not go see opening night movies. It's like actually pretty close to a religious perspective for him. He just won't do it. He didn't know it was opening night when we took some kids and went to see it Friday night. In the movie, for those of you who are not familiar, and you don't need to love baseball, this was the cool thing, right? So there were folks who care about justice issues who were there. There were folks on date night, maybe it felt like a safe date night. And then there were some serious sports fans that were shouting in the theater. And it was cool that we all could join over one movie. In the movie, Branch Rickey is the owner of the Brooklyn Dodgers at that point. And he decided that he was going to bring, as he said, a Negro on. And he waited for the right person, just like during the Civil Rights Movement, they waited for Rosa Parks. And as he talked with Mr. Robinson and really got in his face, quite literally, about what was Mr. Robinson going to do when people threw horrible words at him, Jackie Robinson's response to Branch Rickey was, "So, you want a player who doesn't have a courage to fight back?" To which Mr. Rickey responded, "No, I want a player who has the courage not to fight back." Nonviolent resistance. Dr. King continues, "One of the basic points in your statement is that the action that I and my associates have taken in Birmingham is untimely. Some have asked, why didn't you give the new city administration time to act? Lamentably, it's a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. We know through painful experience, freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that's well-timed in view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait almost always means never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is indeed justice denied." And then, after Dr. King talked about the nations of Asia and Africa moving with jet-like speed toward gaining political independence, he said, "We still creep at horse and buggy pace toward gaining a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. But when you see vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will, drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you see hate-filled policemen curse, kick, kill your black brothers and sisters, when you suddenly find yourself tongue-twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on TV and see tears welling up in her eyes, to be told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and you see the ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, and see her beginning to distort her personality by developing an unconscious bitterness toward white people, when you concoct an answer to a 5-year-old son who is asking, why do white people treat colored people so mean, when you're harried day and night by fear because you're a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait." He continues a few sentences later. "You express a great deal of anxiety over our unwillingness to break laws." Further down he says, "How does one determine whether a law is just or unjust? To put it in the terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal law and natural law. I must make, and before I get to the key part of this, another little quote from 42. And it says at the end what ball player he becomes, but in the beginning of the movie, don't worry, there are not going to be any spoiler alerts, but there's a very sweet scene where there's a little boy who knows that Jackie Robinson is going to be the first African-American player. And he goes to the game, the first game, with his mom. And for those of you who don't know baseball, what happens is if the ball is thrown at you and it's not in the little square that's called a strike, then you don't swing at it. And if it happens 4 times, it's called a ball, and you get to walk to first base. And that's exactly what happened. You could tell that the pitcher was undone, and Jackie just kept his stance. And he was walked, so he trotted off to first base. The little boy, so excited, said to his mother, "Mama, Mama, he won, he did it, Mom." She quietly says, "He didn't do anything." Understand, he never even swung the bat. And the little boy smiled and said, "Oh, yes, he did. He discombobulated them." And this, beloved, is where the discombobulation happens with Dr. King's letter. I must make 2 honest confessions to you, and this is the key of our time together here. I must make 2 honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the few years I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who's more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, "I agree with you in the goal you seek, I cannot agree with you in your methods of direct action," who paternalistically believes that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the mythical concept of time and constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. Later on, we who engage in nonviolent direct action are not the creators of tension. We merely bring to the surface the hidden tension that is already alive. We bring it out in the open where it must be seen and dealt with. Like a boil that's never cured so long as it's covered up, but opened up in its ugliness, injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. In your statement, you assert that our actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitate violence. But is this a logical assertion? Isn't that like condemning a robbed man because his possession of money precipitated the evil act of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unswerving commitment to truth precipitated the act by the misguided populace? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never-ceasing devotion to God's will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? Later on, he says, "You speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as extremist. I began thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of 2 opposing forces in the Negro community. One is made up of complacency, who have been drained of a sense of somebodyness. The other who are advocating violence, and I remain in the middle. Oppressed people cannot remain oppressed forever. The yearning for freedom manifests itself." And when you look at this online, I'm not going to take time to read the paragraph after that, but it's extraordinary. And then finally at that point he says, "I had hoped that the white moderate would see this need. Perhaps I was too optimistic. Perhaps I expected too much. I suppose I should have realized that a few members could understand the deep groans and passionate yearnings of the oppressed race, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by strong, persistent, action. I'll get to the latter part of his letter in a moment, when he talks about in deep disappointment that he weeps over the laxity of the church. And his hope for something better. But as we pause before we go to the end of his letter, where are the places that injustice is present in our communities? The early worship brought some. For those who are stopped in the midst of driving while black, where they are ticketed and white folks aren't. Recently, one of the teachers in this community, student, was taken by ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That child has gone to school here since he was little. He perceives himself to be an American. He's gone.